Today I'm going to talk with you a little bit about how you're going to build your EcoColumns. So a few years ago I recorded how to build all of the parts of an EcoColumn, and I'm going to give you the links for those videos, which are on YouTube and my website. But let me talk a little bit about what you need. So the best bottles is this shape here. This is a Crystal Geyser brand. It's square shaped. Now I know some parts of the country don't have this brand, but if you can find this type of bottle that is square like this, then that's great. This is one from Kroger brand, which I know Kroger is more common around the United States. You can see it is a square type bottle as well. Now I have written on it no, because for my students in California, this bottle is a lot easier to find, and I don't want them to get these ones because I'll show you the difference. So we want the flat part of the bottle. We want to maximize length in the bottle. This flat part before it tapers up is longer than this flat part. So this is less length than this length here. And when I put them side by side, before the taper, you get about an extra 5 centimeters on this bottle. So this one's better, and for my students, it's easy to find these bottles. These are okay. So some of my students bring in these ones because their parents bought them already. And that's okay. You can use these. The EcoColumn will be shorter by about 15 inches, which is kind of a lot. So I tell my students it's really important you get this style. So how I have them bring it in is I have groups of 4, and I say each kid needs one, and they're like $1 at the local grocery store. And so I say, I don't want the water. Drink the water, do what you want with the water. Bottled water is not the best ecologically, so that can be an issue as well. So I discuss that. I say bottled water is not, and we talk a little bit about bottled water. This is the beginning of the year, so they don't know too much about bottled water and its ecological impacts. So we talk a little bit, but I say we're actually going to use this purified water. So I say you can drink the water and bring it in empty, or you can bring it in full. If they bring it in full and they donate the water, then I have these big buckets that I bought at the hardware store, which for us is called Lowe's or Home Depot. They have these big buckets, and I have like 5 of them in class, and they just pour them in the bucket, and then we use that water later. So, you know, in science, a lot of times we need distilled water, but purified you can get away with because you don't need it quite distilled. But purified is good because they get rid of some of like the chlorine and things like that. So I use it for when I need water that's not tap, but I don't need necessarily distilled water. And so for that, for the rest of the year, I have these buckets. And we also use that water later for EcoColumns to make our aquatic chamber. Okay, so I have students bring in 4 because they need 3, but they often mess up and they need a spare. So 4 is best. Sometimes each student brings in one, and I have 4 people in a group. Sometimes all the groups, they give one person $1, so that person has $4 and they go buy all 4. Sometimes a lot of kids, they have them at home already. A lot of teachers on campus haul these to their classrooms and they donate them. I tell them I won't have spares because most years I don't have spares. On occasion, I have a few spares lying around, so I can help the kids who don't have them. If you're in a school where kids really just do not bring in materials, then over the year you can like send out a picture to your staff and say, hey guys, if you have these, I can use these for science. Please, you know, I'd love these empty. When you're done with them, send them over. And I know teachers who've gotten like 60 of them throughout the year that they just collect in their lab for EcoColumns. Okay. So at home, when you have your 3 bottles, you need 3. Hopefully you're not going to mess up cutting. and you won't need a spare. Again, about half of my groups need a spare because they mess up cutting, and then about half of them have an extra spare that they can loan to students who maybe their group only brought in 2 bottles instead of 4. So it all works out. Okay, another option that you can use is you can use 2-liter bottles, but they're going to be really skinny and tippy. But the traditional EcoColumn was 2-liter bottles. These are much better. Or you can use what's even better than a 2-liter is a 3-liter bottle. So if your state just doesn't have these at all, then use a 3-liter soda bottle. Because you get enough room in there to see good things. Okay, so watch the video on how to cut it. And so there's a couple of things with students. So I have box knives, and my students have never had trouble with box knives in 10 years. They're gonna do an initial cut and then scissors, because if they try and box knife cut the whole thing, it's actually really unstable. It's too sharp and they end up messing up the cut. So they need to just puncture it and then use scissors. And we talk about safety with these. Like with scalpels for dissection, you cut away, you only do a little cut and the rest with scissors to be safe, and you only have a little bit of the blade out. Some kids know about box cutters, some do not. I talk about how dangerous that is and how the blade can snip off and fling into somebody's eyes. So goggles might not be a bad idea during the building process. Okay, so watch the video on how to cut it. And then you're gonna end up with your EcoColumn. Let me kind of get the light better here. I know it's difficult light filming here in my backyard from quarantine. Okay, so I have my 3 bottles. This bottom chamber is the aquatic chamber. And again, the more length, so the bottles you can get where you maximize length is better. You're gonna have 2 holes in it. That's for airflow. You want airflow in here because fish need that air flowing through so it can dissolve in the water. The first year I switched from 2-liter bottles to these, we had dissolved oxygen trouble until we cut these holes. The holes can't be too big, however, so there's instructions for exactly 3 by 3 centimeters, only on 2 sides. These kids drew it on all 4 sides, but I stopped them before they cut all 4 sides because this is going to have a lot of weight and it will collapse and rip this chamber if you make the holes bigger or you make too many of them. So these 2 are sufficient for airflow in the aquatic chamber for fish. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the drainage for EcoColumns. Your students need 2 lids to do it this more traditional way. And there's a couple of options for the holes in the lids. Notice I have 2 different sizes of holes. One of them are very large, about 3 millimeters or more in diameter, and the other are small. So this one goes in the top, the terrestrial chamber, and that's where you have your potting soil. When students are making holes, I have them actually measure because they'll say, oh, are these big enough? And I said, well, for which chamber? And they're like, well, for the terrestrial chamber. I said, are those 3 millimeters? Because the instructions specifically say 3 millimeters. And they're like, well, yeah, sure. Talking about this size. And I say, well, did you measure them? No. So they pick up their ruler and they measure them, and they're not even close to 3 millimeters. So I have them actually measure out the holes. The problem is silt clogs. And so you want them large enough here for the silt to not clog. But this is the sand chamber, the filter chamber. Sand will go through these big ones, but it won't go through very much. If sand goes through a little bit, it's not a big deal. These smaller ones. So you can see on the videos that traditionally we have students heat up and make the holes with a poker. Some teachers use a drill. So here's a power drill. Now, Depending on your classes, you may not want them to drill. So they may come up and bring you the lids and you do the drilling for them. Some teachers use a very large nail, a very big nail, and they heat it up and do it themselves for the students instead of them individually. Now my students have a ton of fun doing this. So anyway, at home, making these at home, you can do it this way. You can do a nail method. So you can, if you have a hammer and nail, you can make your holes this way. You can use a drill. Another thing that you can use instead of these, which I may switch to because it makes it a lot quicker for students, is instead of lids altogether so that you can dispose or recycle the lids, is you have screen door material. So let me grab my bottle, and so what you do here, and I don't have any screen door material, but you take a square, you wrap it around here, and you rubber band it. And then you don't have to worry about holes at all. So screen door material you can buy at the hardware store for your students. It's pretty inexpensive. Get the plastic, not the metal, and then cut them little squares, and then they can put it on here instead. And then you don't need to worry about drainage, making the drainage holes at all. You can just use that. And so I've been told that that's a quick and easy solution. The drawback is the kids love making the hole. All right, then you have two chambers here that are pretty identical. And so the top one is going to have your soil and plants and bugs. The bottom one is going to have, what's the middle chamber technically, is going to have sand and gravel. That's a filter chamber. So let's talk about filter chamber versus decomposition chamber. So the reason I do a filter chamber here is because to me it more mimics nature. You don't really have decomposition that immediately runs into streams. It can happen, but in our aquifers, in our streams, we have sand and gravel that helps filter pollutants and things before it gets into the waterways. And so this helps me introduce that concept to my students, which is really important because we don't have a ton of surface water in Southern California. We have a river in our town, but it's dry for 9 months of the year. It'll only have surface water in our rainy season, which is in the winter. And then it's all soaks in, and then we have our groundwater, which is half our drinking water. So my students don't understand anything about riparian ecosystem. And a lot of the creeks are dry throughout the year, and we can't access them because a lot of them have cemented sides and gates, and you can't get there. So my students don't have really hardly any experience with rivers, riparian, whatever. So to have this filter chamber in the middle helps them at least understand a little bit. Decomposition chambers here also can get very mucky and have a lot of stuff that kills aquatic life down here. So that's why I have a filter chamber instead of decomposition chamber. I know that there are teachers who do decomposition in the middle and they do it successfully. So that is great, you can do that. Okay, when you're building this at home, fill it with whatever you have. So the videos are going to show you that you're going to put some gravel here and some gravel here. If you just have little rocks around, that's fine. You don't need to go buy gravel. Just put some little rocks here, and that's to help improve drainage. Soil, if you have potting soil, I use potting soil in my classes because our natural soil here is terrible. It's clayish, it has very little nutrients, and hardly anything grows. And for students, they want success with things that grow. So we use potting soil, and we monitor the soil health over time. The potting soil I recommend is Miracle Grow, or like the best potting soil you can find. because I've used cheap potting soil with students and it flushes through so much silt, and it's dirty. It's soil, it's dirty anyway, but it's really like black and dirty, the cheap stuff. So I've learned over the years, get the expensive stuff. It makes EcoColumns much better. All right, so then now at home, put your whatever soil you have, dig it out of your garden, go to the park if you're in an apartment, dig up some soil from wherever. It doesn't matter as you build a sample EcoColumn. Seeds, you can put in whatever seeds you have too, or you can put in whatever plants you have. My students, I have a variety of seeds. They have to put in 2. I want to show you some of the seeds that we use. All right, so my students are allowed to plant 5 seeds, and this is overcrowding, so we can talk about competition and ecological tolerance in that overcrowding. But they also, not all of them will germinate, so we can talk about germination rates and old seeds and things like that as well. So they have to plant 2 of their 5 seeds as legumes. So any kind of bean is fine. Peas, so I get big bags of peas we use for salinization lab. We also use for here. And so peas, beans, those are great legumes. I bought clover once. None of them actually grew. So I don't use clover anymore for legumes. But peas and beans are great legumes. Then they can choose 3 other seeds. Some really good choices are basil. It grows really fast and kids really like basil. Some of them, it grows really big and they take it home and cook with it. Here's some more basil packages. Radishes are good too. They grow very, very fast. Sometimes if they'll actually grow into a radish, sometimes they don't, and I don't really know why. Another good choice, last year I actually had giant sunflowers. Now they never grew into a sunflower because there just wasn't enough soil space, but it grew so fast and it was really exciting for the kids to have this really tall plant. So that was kind of fun. Some more sunflower seeds. Here are spinach. Spinach doesn't do that well when I've had it with kids, so they don't often plant spinach. Arugula is really nice. They've never heard of arugula, but it is spicy as well. And so again, where do I get my seeds? Honestly, I just pick up seeds here and there. People give me seeds. I belong to a community garden, so sometimes there's packages of seeds that people donate and I can use for my classroom. So and sometimes I go buy seeds. Now, if you buy seeds, I don't have these packages here, but ones that are made for containers, like last year I had really good luck with container cucumbers, and they actually flowered and started to grow little cucumbers, which was really great. So if you can find container varieties, that's another good choice as well. Okay, let's talk about the aquatic chamber. Oh, and in the top, I have students, once the seedlings come up, then they can put on leaf litter. So they go outside of my classroom in the school and they find some living and dead leaves and they rip them up and they line the soil, and then they put in bugs. So they collect pill bugs and which roly-polies and pincher bugs and worms. They need to bring in worms. They can dig up the worms. They can go to Walmart in the sporting goods sections. They have a little fridge for bait. They can buy worms if they want to buy worms, but it's much more exciting if they go find them themselves and bring them in. At your school, you could go on a bug hunt if you wanted to go on a bug hunt with your students. My school would be easily depleted. I have 5 sections of apes and 36 in a section if they're full. So we would deplete all our bugs if we bug hunted at school. So they bring them in and it's a fun day. The bug day is super fun, and it's about a week after you build them and you plant your seeds. About 2 weeks after you build them and you flush through the silt, it's time for your aquatic chamber. So when you build these for APSI, you're not necessarily going to have your fish and stuff, because really you need to be flushing through the silt for a couple of weeks. before the water is clean enough. But you could do it if you wanted to. You could take it all apart and then water each chamber and have it drain not into here, so to keep the water cleaner. So down here we have once, after about 2 weeks, and we've drained, I have gravel again, and I just use construction gravel, not fish tank gravel, because construction gravel is super cheap. Fish tank gravel's not. And construction gravel, you have to clean it. So that's where you have colanders. So these are $1 at the dollar store. So I have one for each group, but you could have kids share, and they clean their gravel really, really well before they use it in any of the chambers. Okay. So gravel, and then I use that water in my buckets to fill it here. And then we put in some water plants like Alodia or duckweed or whatever I can get. If you live near a pond, you can collect water plants from the pond and put them in. You can put pond water in here instead. So make it really local to what's available for you. You can use local soil instead of potting soil. You can use local plants. You can use local pond water. Whatever you can get a hand on that's local, if you live in an environment like that, you are super lucky. I can't use local stuff. So we use potting soil. We use purified water that was originally in these, and then we inoculate it with my fish tank water to bring in the nitrifying bacteria. We have to let that colonize for a couple of days, then we can add our fish. And those directions are all laid out for you with pictures and with special videos. So I'm just giving you a preview right now of EcoColumns. One of the other things, when you have seedlings, I have you make a top like this. Try and get out of the shadows. And it gently waters the seedlings. This only is needed really until they start growing, and then you get rid of it because your plants are going to grow above. This is not a closed system. So what I have students do, once the fish are there and they've been pooping and there's a lot of nitrates in here, they scoop water out of the aquatic chamber, they put it into the terrestrial chamber to water their plants. But that's not enough water for them, so then they can water it with some tap water as well. Okay. I go over the water testing equipment with you guys on a separate video. Whatever equipment you have is fine. Let me just put this out here. You can do EcoColumns the first year with no equipment and do it observations. It's still extremely fun for students. You don't have to have a lot of stuff. If you have rulers to measure plant heights, you can take data over time with plant heights. If you have pH strips, you can monitor the pH of the water. If you have thermometers, you can monitor the pH of the water, the pH of the soil. I'm sorry, the temperature of the soil and water. So there's probably thermometers lying around your lab. There's probably pH paper you can get for pretty cheap, and you have rulers. Start with those to do your data collection and observations. Over time, you can get other things. So in my videos, I'm going to show you dissolved oxygen meters. I'm going to show you nitrate test strips, which you can buy. They're pretty cheap. I'm going to show you the meters and the things that I have, but that's because I've been doing it for 15 years and I've built up my supply over time. So use whatever you have. Let's talk about soil. I do soil testing here too. You can use rapid test soil test. You can do it at the beginning and at the end of EcoColumns. So I run EcoColumns 2 to 3 months. I just sort of watch them and look at my school calendar and figure out when they need to come down. And beginning and end, you can use the rapid test soil testing kits. I have soil probes, which are probes that measure pH, temp, and combined nutrients. So it's not as good as the rapid test for fertility because it combines NPK into one reading. That's not great, but it's cheap and easy readings once you have the probes. Super easy. But most teachers don't have those, so they just use like the rapid test before and after. So you could do your soil testing that way and not have to do it later in the year if you want to. All right, so good luck, and I look forward to seeing all of your sample EcoColumns. And be sure to ask me any questions that I did not cover here.